Hello all and welcome back to the channel. As it is coming towards the end of October, that can mean only one thing, and that is that Halloween is approaching. I have mentioned on numerous occasions how horror is my favourite genre. And it's a really hard genre to be a fan of because it's done badly a lot. Especially in film, but also in books as well. Horror is seen as gore. And I don't like a film with gore and it's a bit boring. I much prefer horror with atmosphere. So I thought I would create a video with some books, some of my favourite books and favourite authors who do horror well. So yeah, if you like a spooky book, keep watching. So I'm going to break the video into kind of three main chunks. I'm going to do classic horror stories, contemporary adult horror stories, and of course anything that falls under YA as well, because there's some really good YA horror out there. So I'll start off with the classics. I've opted not to include any Edgar Allan Poe, which is a travesty, but he is very good. You should also check him out. So the first author on my list is an English ghost story writer called M.R. James. Now this is a Penguin collection of his short stories. There are dozens of different collections that you can pick up in pretty much the horror section of any half-decent Waterstones or Foyles or bookshop. And he does very, very English, very quiet, very subtle ghost stories. His most famous one is a story called A Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad, which is really short but really creepy. He tends to focus on forbidden, kind of forgotten knowledge and ghosts, and they're just very punchy, very short, very memorable ghost stories. I would definitely recommend checking some of them out. You can read 2 or 3 in an evening and then not sleep, so you may as well read 2 or 3 more, I guess. The next classic author I would check out for horror, it's actually one of my favourite authors of all time. I've mentioned him numerous times on this channel already, and that is H.P. Lovecraft, who I think is probably one of the greatest horror writers, certainly of his generation. His again, short story writer, some novellas as well, and his focus tends to be on things that are so unknowable that you very rarely see the things in his story. What you see is his characters being driven insane by the things that they see, which I think is a much better way of doing horror. Instead of describing everything right down to every nitty-gritty detail, he lets you imagine the things that are so repulsive that his characters just break, their minds just snap. I would recommend, if you've never read any before, start with Dagon, which is quite a short story. He's very well known for The Call of Cthulhu, which is really quite well known, but I would say At the Mountains of Madness is a better, longer story if you quite fancy that. Whisper in the Darkness by him is really good as well. So yeah, one of my favourite authors, very much of his time as well, so some of his writing can be a little bit problematic, but if you can push past that, his horror is really second to none. Okay, next up are some proper horror classics which everyone will have heard of. I couldn't decide which one to go with. I think I really like this edition of Dracula by Bram Stoker, which I think is really, really pretty. But it's not the easiest read in the world, I wouldn't say. I love it. I really love this book, but it took me a good long time to get into it. And if you want something a little bit more accessible, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley is a surefire hit. It's largely considered one of the first science fiction novels of all time. The horror in it is subtle, it's quite philosophical as well. It asks a lot of really really interesting, very insightful questions about humanity and what it means to be human and how we treat others who are different. It's a phenomenal book, and this edition's really nice because it's covered in anatomical hearts. Okay, so next category of horror is the adult contemporary horror novels. So this is some of the stuff that has come out in the last 10, 20 years or so. The first one that I will recommend, who I don't have a particular book to recommend, but I would always recommend checking out some Stephen King. I have a complicated relationship with Stephen King. I think that the longer his books are, the more disappointing his payoff is. So I would go with a shorter Stephen King novel. Carrier's quite fun. I think Pet Sematary is more accessible. The Shining is quite interesting as well. His collections of short stories are actually really, really good as well. So I would recommend a collection of short stories, so like 4 Past Midnight or something like that. If you feel like taking the plunge into a longer novel, Needful Things is pretty good, although it goes a bit off the boil towards the end actually. It is brilliant, but again, poor ending. Standard Stephen King. What else? Oh, or Salem's Lot, actually, which is really good. I loved Salem's Lot, so that's really good as well. So yeah, Stephen King is really good. He can just be a bit hit and miss. Okay, so the first book after Stephen King that I actually have with me is The Loney by Andrew Michael Hurley, which won the Costa Award for Best Debut Novel last year, I believe. This is a gothic ghost story set in the 1950s, I believe, on the northwest coast of the United Kingdom. It's a very slow, pondering build of unease and tension. The characters in it has a lot of family kind of secrets and guilt, and it looks at aspects of religion and of family and of... It's very well layered. There's a lot going on just under the surface, and the horror itself is very slow. It's very meandering. It's never, not once in fact in the novel, is it explicit, which is really, really good. The characters are all bitter and slightly broken. It's a really good book. I would definitely recommend it, especially to non-horror fans actually, because it's a little bit more of a kitchen sink drama with elements of horror underneath it. So it has that kind of almost the first series of True Detective sort of feel to it. Next one that I would recommend is The 3 by Sarah Lotz, which I think I've brought up in videos before. A really, really creepy novel about a series of plane crashes that all happen at exactly the same time around the world. And it's about the 3 survivors of those plane crashes, who are 3 children, who when found in the wreckage are found wrong. There's something subtly different and unnerving about them, and it's told in a kind of a journalistic style, as if it's a factual book about these children and the events that unfolded after their finding. Really, really creepy, very cleverly done. Absolutely adored this book. It's one of the best horror novels I've read for a very long time, because again, it's not explicit. Everything is shades of grey. You're never quite sure if what's happening is genuinely supernatural or if what's happening is the product of mass hysteria. Very good. Okay, next one is Dark Matter by Michelle Paver. Now, many people may well know Michelle Paver for her children's series, which is The Chronicles of Ancient Darkness, which are Stone Age children's books. And when she announced that she was writing a ghost story, I was really intrigued to see how that would go, and it's phenomenal. It's very Susan Hill. It's set in the Arctic, and it's very dark and very creepy, and and her characterization is really good. It's genuinely quite unsettling. I adored it. It kept me up until the very small hours of the night trying to finish it, because it was compelling. It was constantly twisting and constantly filled with this tension that made you need to read on. Her new ghost story has just come out as well, which is called Thin Air, which I picked up the other day, and I'm really looking forward to reading that probably over the next couple of weeks to really get me into that kind of Halloween-y, wintry atmosphere. Quite like a spooky book as it gets darker at night. So yeah, Dark Matter, really well worth checking out. She's a phenomenal writer. And finally, the last one in my adult selection, and this is going to be a challenge for me, let's see how I do, is Let the Right One In by John Adkve Lindqvist, which I think is how it's pronounced, but I am honestly not sure. He's a Norwegian author. The book was made into a film in its native Norway and then remade in America as well. It is a vampire story set in Norway, just outside of Oslo, and it's really sweet, actually. The friendship between the two main characters, the two children, is really quite dark but very funny and really quite touching in a way. So they are surrounded by these horrific events, this really bleak, dark, snowy landscape, and their friendship is very unconventional but works really well against the adults who surround them, who are really messed up, and they are quite innocent in their own way, even though both of them are pretty messed up themselves. Compared to the adults around them, they're really lovely, and it's a really twisted, quite upsetting novel in places. It's not an easy read, but I would definitely give it a go if you're looking for vampires done with a little bit more heart and a little bit more black humour as well. It's a really good book. The film, I've only seen the Norwegian film, I haven't seen the American remake, but the film is really, really pretty as well. It's very well shot. I would definitely give that a look in as well. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the YA books that I would recommend for Halloween this year. First one is Say Her Name. This is a tatty looking proof copy, but Say Her Name by Juno Dawson. Say Her Name is a retelling of the Bloody Mary myth told in a high school, a UK high school, and it takes a lot of kind of nods from a lot of Japanese horror and that kind of almost point horror, tongue-in-cheek style of teen characters and drama, but injects a really quite a tense sense of unease throughout it. There's some really quite scary scenes in the book as well. I would definitely give this a try. Juno's books are really, really good. I'm a very big fan of hers, and Say Her Name is the first one I read. Okay, next on the YA list, and something a little bit more fast-paced and a little bit more gore, even though I said that that's not really how I do my horror. I do make an exception for Will Hill's Department 19 series. These books are brilliant. They are so much fun, really dark, full of really great mythology. They are about a shady government organisation whose job it is to murder vampires and keep humanity from ever discovering that vampires are real. Will clearly has a lot of love for classic literature. There are lots of nods to Mary Shelley and Bram Stoker in the books. There are 5 of them in total, and they are breakneck speed, really well paced, filled with lots of darkness and a really, really kind of vibrant, almost Lost Boys feel behind the vampires. They're very rowdy, and they like pulling off people's arms and beating them to death with them. If that's not a good reason to read them, then I don't know what is. And while we are on the subject of horror books that are twisted and dark and very fast-paced, The Call by Pada O'Gillen is I think I mentioned this in one of my previous videos, is an Irish fantasy story kind of pulling on Irish folklore and Irish mythology about teenagers who are stolen away by evil fairies who force them to fight for their lives for 24 hours, and the ones that the fairies catch, the she, they will twist them and distort them and murder them in the most brutally horrific ways. It's really good fun. You will fly through it really quickly. It's very fast paced, really breakneck speed, and yeah, definitely recommend it if you like your horror a little bit more on the Clive Barker side. The next one is not so much YA, slightly younger, I guess kind of middle grade into teen, is the Lockwood & Co books, which I have mentioned at great length on numerous occasions to lots and lots of different people. One of the best children's series I have ever read. I absolutely adore them. It's about a group of children who are part of a paranormal investigation agency in a world populated by ghosts, which are lethal ghosts but are unseeable by adults. Only children can see them, so only children can fight them. And it's Percy Jackson meets The Woman in Black. It's Sherlockian and gothic, and it's filled with these brilliant friendships between the three main characters, which really reminded me of Harry, Ron and Hermione in the Harry Potter books. They have that similar sort of fallings out and making up. The fourth book, The Creeping Shadow, has just come out. It's absolutely superb. Yeah, I would recommend these definitely to people who don't normally like a horror book, because they get the creepy atmosphere and chills right, but because they're aimed slightly younger, they're never unbearably scary, although they get pretty creepy, and I love the characters. I'm in love with the universe entirely of these books. Okay, and the last book on my list is Long Lankin by Lindsay Barraclough. It's one of the scariest books I have ever read. I love this book so much. It's about two sisters who are sent to stay with their grandmother. Yes, it's been a long time since I read it. During the Second World War. And they're sent to stay in this village in the middle of the countryside. Everything is very unsettled. Everything's very creepy. There's a history and a folklore and a dark past behind this village, and a curse that is still clinging on to it. And the eponymous Long Lankin character in it is horrifying. Really unsettling character. Yeah, so that is absolutely brilliant. So yes, there you have it. Those are my recommendations for some spooky reads for Halloween and for all the year round, because being terrified and horrified and traumatized is not just for Halloween, it's for life. Sweet dreams.